Well, and so we now begin our conversation about changing attitudes. We've changed our attitudes a little bit about gambling and poker, and now we're
Yeah.
going to talk about changing attitudes in the workplace. One of the questions that
Ooh,
I get
okay.
asked the most in leadership workshops when doing training on giving feedback and coaching employees to higher levels of performance always comes down to this idea of an employee with a bad attitude. How do I, as a leader, address someone I perceive as having a bad attitude? And because it's a question I get asked so often, it just felt like fodder for our show here. So why don't we start with that, Alyssa? Is that something that you ever had to struggle with as a leader, that you had somebody who had a bad attitude and weren't necessarily sure how to go about fixing it?
Sure. I think that the thing that um I look to now to try to understand that categorization or that classification of bad attitude is is it a sustained kind of behaviors? Is it a one-off situation? I think most of the time when we as leaders are talking about someone with a bad attitude, it's more than, once a week. It's, continually kind of in any situation, no matter how well improved and or their requested needs being met, excuse me, um, nothing seems to move the marker for that individual,
Mm-hmm.
right? But I'm also conscientious now of the dialogues that we've had previously about that toxic positivity, right? So
Yeah.
understanding that not everybody responds or moves through things through that positive frame, nor can you motivate every single individual on your team with positivity and motivation of, we just got to get through this and blah, 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 trying to lift their spirits
Yeah.
because that's not the only way to be in the world. But I think that those two kind of positions put us as leaders in this space of when we know it, we know it. We
Mm.
know that that individual has a bad attitude, right? And so I think the first thing is, I'm going to trust your gut because I trust my own. Um, and I think that the strategy that I take now to these types of circumstances is rather than keep coming back to specific instances of this is what you said, this is what you did, or this is what how you acted in this particular situation, is rather own it. Own it for yourself. This is when you said this is what it made me feel.
Mm-hmm.
So operating in the opportunity of the feeling space because they might not understand your logic approach. They might not understand the way that you think that they should approach that issue, right? But they get feelings because they got lots of them, right? So being able to say and express how what it is that they're saying and doing feels to you as their leader, and then circling into that conversation is if is that what you're feeling? Use that as the opportunity to say, let's go deeper then, because obviously this other stuff is just surface. If this is the way you're operating, what are you feeling about that truly? Because we don't seem to be resolving it. Now, of course, that's my coaching icky, sticky, gray stuff. So clean that up, Joe. Make it make sense. Give our leaders some tactical strategies. Where do you go with this issue?
Well, when I get asked the question, my first response is a question back. What are they saying or doing that's troubling you? because we have to move away from attitude as this sort of subjective descriptor
Mhm.
and get clear about behavior. And once we do that, not only are we getting clearer about what it is that we want to change, but we're going to learn how to address it in a way that doesn't trigger defensiveness from that person. If you sit across from somebody and say, I have concerns about your attitude, that's experienced as a character assault, right? Our attitude is sort of core to who we are and how we show up. And what I think often is troubling to the leader is the packaging, right? The style often that the person is using to communicate. And when we say we have a problem with somebody's attitude, we're sort of inferring some things there about their motivation, directly, explicitly inferring some things back at them that doesn't feel good if you're on the receiving end of that.
Yeah.
So here's a little exercise that I ask leaders to do a lot. I ask them to do this exercise when they tell me they have somebody with a bad attitude, but I also ask them to do this exercise when I get told, I have somebody on my team I just don't get along with, and I'm struggling with that. Here's what I encourage leaders to do. Take a sheet of paper, or 7, and make a list of everything about this person that drives you nuts. What is every little thing that you don't like, that gets on your nerves? Write it all down. If they interrupt at meetings, write that down. If they come in late, write that down. If they have terrible taste in shoes and you just don't get it, write that down. Write it all down. And then you go back through the list with a couple of questions. What things on this list are quirks of personality that really aren't my business, or that really aren't worth my time and attention to address? Cross those things out. And then you go back through the list and you say, of the items left on the list, what's doing harm? What are the behaviors, the specific behaviors that are doing harm? And then you circle those. And the stuff that doesn't get circled, you leave that be as well. And now, if you've got a handful of things circled, now it's time to pick your battle. What's the most important thing on this list that I think needs to be changed? What's the thing on this list that I need to really try to work with this person on? So let's say you've moved through that entire exercise, and what you've come down to is that this person is constantly dismissing other people's ideas at meetings. That's a very specific behavior. Now, and sometimes what lives between that, Alyssa, is, again, these subjective descriptors. So oftentimes if we're doing this in a workshop, like I might say to somebody, what's the problem with the person's attitude? And they'll say, well, they're always negative. And I'll say, oh, you have a negaholic. Okay, we've all worked with negaholics. They're addicted to giving voice to their displeasure, or they shoot down other people's ideas. But if you sit across from somebody and say, I'm really concerned that you're constantly negative at staff meetings, that's subjective. You know what you mean, but they don't. And that's experienced as a character attack. But if you can translate negative into a specific behavior, a what and a when, then you can sit across from that person and say, hey, I noticed at the staff meeting this morning, you interrupted Mary 3 times when she was trying to talk through some potential solutions for this XYZ problem. And you dismissed her idea as something we tried a long time ago and that didn't work and would be a waste of time. And did you notice how that stifled discussion immediately? And did you notice how quickly everybody retreated from any kind of problem solving at all? This is a specific behavior that I need to ask you to work on because it's doing harm. How does that feedback sound to you, Alyssa, if you were to be on the receiving end of it, as opposed to, I'm concerned about your attitude, or I'm concerned that you're too negative?
Right. So I'm sitting in the chair listening, and I'm trying to envision myself as an audience member, to listening to what I said and then listening to what you said. And I'm thinking, perhaps people don't see the corollaries where I can now see them to what you said, which is very tactical and very strategic and very appropriate and absolutely will work, versus what I said, which is, this whole feeling zone and the gray, right? But we are saying the same
Yes.
thing, just in a different way, right? And so you're saying name that specific behavior, and you gave a great
Yes.
way to get there, right? With the list and, what's doing harm. What I'm saying is once you get to that part, then ask, where you asked, did you notice how everyone moved away? Did you notice how it stifled the rest of the meeting? That's where I'm saying lean on the feeling of it, right? To
Yes.
say, when you do that, when you interrupt, I feel stifled. I feel cringy. I feel embarrassed for you,
Mm-hmm.
embarrassed for me. Name the specific things and the feelings, so then you can offer that understanding to them, because inevitably that person has felt embarrassed and or stifled. Maybe that's the root of it, right?
Mm.
In some capacity in their life. And so that, again, rather than feeling like judgment, as because when you say things like you interrupted and you did this, uh, and changing your attitude, right? And making it very subjective in that context, that feels like judgment. But when we can rather say the specific thing and the resulting noticing, the self-awareness, the feelings of it, those things actually aren't incongruent. They can
Right.
go hand in hand, right? So different approaches, but I think it gets us to the same end. And I feel like one builds on the other.
And I think that we're really looking at a couple of the different pieces and parts of a conversation. Because when you sit down and you have a feedback conversation with someone, really the first thing we have to do is name the behavior. Hey, I'm concerned that XYZ is
Right.
happening. Are you aware that this is happening? And in thinking about what I just said, if we really want to supercharge that dialogue, you don't say, hey, did you notice that it really stifled discussion? Actually, what we should say from a coaching perspective is, what did you notice happened?
Yeah.
When you said XYZ. Tell me about what you saw happening in the room. And then we practice our shutting up, and we try to pull that person into that conversation. And if they don't get there, then maybe we say, hey, did you notice this stifle? Did people kind of retreated? You may have to give it to them if you can't get it from them.
Mm-hmm.
I think that what you described is something that I think is important to happen a little bit later in the conversation, though equally as important, because we're talking about the impact of the behavior. Whenever you sit across from somebody and you give them feedback and you say, hey, this behavior is something I'm concerned about, I can guarantee that one of the first things coming out of that person's mouth is going to be a defense of their intent. They're going to say, well, I was just trying to move us along. We never finish our agenda, and we got a lot to do, and I know nobody likes wasting time, and we tried that before and it didn't work. They're going to defend what they see as their perfectly acceptable, even good reason for engaging in that behavior. And what we have to do as leaders is acknowledge their intent and say, great, I understand that was your intent, but that's not what happened. And that's not how it was experienced by other people. So your intent was A, but let's talk about your impact. And so now what you described, I felt icky, I felt cringy. That's an impact. That's one person's impact. And you can go around and talk about other people's impact. And, sometimes when we give feedback to employees, we need to talk about the impact it has on our customers and the impact that it has on the team's ability to fulfill its mission. In the end, though, what we're really getting at is, will this person acknowledge that a change is necessary? Because let's be honest, there are some folks listening to this podcast right now who, if they sat across from an employee and said, when you said that at the staff meeting, I felt cringy and a little bit embarrassed, they're going to go, so? I don't care. Right? There are some employees who are way more concerned with being right. True. They're more concerned with being right than being helpful. And in that case, that's sometimes where we as leaders have to say, listen, I get that you don't agree that this behavior is problematic, but I need you to commit to changing anyway. And if they refuse, well, that's a whole other issue. That's a whole other conversation. Now we're kind of going down the path of, can you stay? Can you continue in this role?
Yeah. That's a great distinction, is being able to walk them along that pathway of, giving voice to their intent, but then helping them through, hopefully, some level of self-awareness with the impact, right?
Right.
So what I heard was being able to take the feeling initially, right, and writing very specific behaviors, right, and for ourselves, and then being able to truly identify what is harmful,
Yes.
and picking those battles, right, and then in that feedback conversation, navigating those points of behavior and um, intent and impact as really the continuum of feedback, coaching, in those individuals that we think fall under that umbrella,
Yeah.
that vast umbrella of
Yeah.
bad attitude.
And there's a final component of this, and we're kind of giving a bonus boss script here, which is what I call an accountability question. And then we get into an accountability question where when we say, I know you may not agree, but I need you to understand. Which I know that you don't agree, but I need you to understand that this is something that can't continue to happen. And so then we tag an accountability question on the end of that. Can I count on you to, and then you name the new behavior that you want them to use. Can I count on you to refrain from interrupting others at the staff meeting, even if you think that their idea is terrible? And exploring a better way to share that with the group. Can I count on you to work on that? And the yes or no is going to determine what happens next.
I love these conversations, Joe. It's like that whole movie, the box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get. Although here on Boss Better Now, you're always going to walk away with some really practical, awesome, and maybe some enlightening, ushy gushy feel stuff too.
It's the
And
yin
it's
to the
going
yang.
to serve you well.
Absolutely.